Today's episode will spotlight Lightning legends of the past, present, and future, starting with the burning question of, should there be more Lightning members of the NHL Quarter Century Team?
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Josh Sperber here, welcoming you into another edition of Locked On Lightning and thanking you for making Locked On Lightning your first listen every day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And if your team is the Tampa Bay Lightning, then this is the show for you. And today's show is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. And I want to start today off by congratulating Steven Stamkos, a Lightning legend, for being the only Lightning initially named to the NHL Quarter Century Team. I know that there was a large fan vote component, but I think there are a couple of players that I think could be replaced. Victor Hedman, to me, was not one of the guys that I am hugely surprised about leaving off the NHL Quarter Century Team, which was very offensively dominated. And I think Hedman was certainly among the best NHL defensemen, but the ones that were chosen, I think, definitely deserved it. First off, the 6 goalies on the team doesn't make sense because there's as many or more goaltenders than defensemen in this. And if you're taking off more goalies and adding on more defensemen, then you might start with putting the captain Victor Hedman on there. But we're going to start with the goaltenders because there's one, I think, glaring omission there, and that's Andrei Vasilevskiy. And we go down the list of the goalies selected. Martin Brodeur, obviously on the Quarter Century Team. Marc-Andre Fleury, not necessarily obvious, but that's not one that I'm mad about. Henrik Lundqvist, I mean, I grew up in New York. I can't really say no to that. He was hockey in New York for most of my childhood. Roberto Luongo, I'm only really mad at that because he played for the Panthers. But, you know, rivalry aside, he is absolutely deserving of that honor, mostly for his time with the Canucks, though. And Patrick Waugh, maybe the best goaltender of all time. It's either him or Marty Brodeur, one of those two guys. So those first 5 goalies, I don't have as much of a problem with. Carey Price, though, is, again, not a goalie that I'm saying is not deserving of this honor. He was an elite goaltender in 700 starts, 712 career games, 8 shutouts and 92 postseason games with a .919 save percentage, but no Stanley Cups and a losing postseason record. And that is the biggest thing for me that, in my opinion, would have Carey Price off of that Quarter Century Team in favor of Andrei Vasilevskiy, who has to be right outside that top 6 there for Tampa Bay Lightning. He's coming off of a season where he saw more shots than almost anyone in the NHL and had the second most saves in the entire NHL this season. And the main difference, if you look at the stats between Carey Price and Andrei Vasilevskiy, to me, the main difference is the high draft pick. They're both first rounders. Price, a 5th overall pick for the Canadiens. And, of course, the Lightning selected Vasi 19th overall in 2012. And you look at their stats, again, in the regular season, quite similar. A little under 250 more, or a little under 150, more starts for Carey Price than Andrei Vasilevskiy over the course of his pro career. 9 more shutouts in that time. The same save percentage, a very small differential in goals allowed average, slightly held by Carey Price, and in wins, a mark that Vasilevskiy still has plenty of time to pass, is separated by 30. That's a mark that Vasilevskiy would be able to grab next year, and he's played 5 fewer seasons than Carey Price. We remember at the beginning of the year that Andrei Vasilevskiy became the fastest player to 300 wins in his entire NHL career. He got it before 500 games played in the entire NHL, first to ever do that. Then, of course, there's the playoff record. And I'm one of those people that takes a lot of stock in playoff wins, Stanley Cup championships, even though a lot of that has to do with the team around the players. And it certainly can't be argued that Andrei Vasilevskiy has played on better teams than Carey Price has. That definitely gives him an advantage. But when it comes to the playoffs, Carey Price, 43 for 45 in 92 total games. Recent failings aside, Andrei Vasilevskiy is 67 and 50 in 120 playoff games. Again, he's played more playoff games than Carey Price, but the percentages wildly favor Vasilevskiy in that area. And I think that especially when you're talking about the best goalies of an era, players that define an era are not players that have their most success in the regular season. They're guys that help their team win cups. And you've got two goalies on this list that did not win a Stanley Cup. And I don't think anyone's going to argue that Carey Price is a better goaltender than Henrik Lundqvist. Also, Price matched up with Vasilevskiy in a Stanley Cup final. Vasilevskiy won. The Lightning won. So I think even if you going off the playoffs, if I were making this quarter century team, Carey Price is off, Andrei Vasilevskiy is on. That seems like a no-brainer and a big miss from this quarter century team. Then there is the offensive players, talking about the guys who debuted after 2010. Go down this list again. Johnny Gaudreau, I think, especially in light of what happened this past summer, you can't argue with that. I think he just means a lot more to hockey. That selection means a lot more than just him being the great player that he was. Nathan McKinnon, Cale Makar, Austin Matthews, Connor McDavid. I don't think that you can really argue a lot of those. Leon Draisaitl is the one that irks me a little bit because goal scoring, I think he has the edge on Nikita Kucherov. Every other part of the game, not so much. Kuch is 6 points away from 1,000 in his career. He's got almost 40 more than Leon Draisaitl, who granted has had an absolutely great resurgence in the last 4 years, 4 consecutive 100-point seasons. I think the only reason that Nikita Kucherov doesn't have that same amount of 4 straight 100-point seasons is because he played 47 games in 21 and 22. And even in that span, he had 69 points. And I find it hard-pressed to find someone who would want Leon Draisaitl on their team rather than Nikita Kucherov. Another big reason there, we've got the playoffs conversation with Carey Price and Andrei Vasilevskiy. Leon Draisaitl is not even the best player on his team. Connor McDavid absolutely takes that honor. And yeah, he had a great season this year, winning the Rocket Richard. He's won a couple of awards. But even with that core of and Connor McDavid, no cups for the Oilers during that time. One Stanley Cup final. And I just think that means something when the stats are as close as they are between Nikita Kucherov and Leon Draisaitl. Draisaitl has about 30 more goals than Kuch. Kuch has about 50 more assists than Draisaitl. No, sorry, I read that wrong. 80 more assists than Draisaitl. Plus minus, vastly different. Kuch is plus 157. Draisaitl plus 87. Also, Draisaitl averages 1 minute more of ice time over the course of his career. A little bit younger, yes. And again, the big difference here, Draisaitl was a third-round pick. Kucherov, a second-round pick. Honestly, I think, to me, that makes it a little bit more favorable to Kucherov. You draft a guy third overall, you expect that guy to be an absolute stud. A guy who comes in a late second round turning into one of, if not the best players in the NHL today, boggles my mind that Kucherov was left off the team in favor of Leon Draisaitl. So I might be sounding like a little bit of a Lightning homer, which frankly is fair, but I think that Vasilevsky and Kucherov got gypped when it comes to being on this NHL quarter century team. And definitely Steven Stamkos deserved it, but I think that there could have been and probably should have been at least two other bolts on that quarter century team as well. And in a half century team, we might be seeing some even more bolts, but that's 25 years away. Right now, the future of the Lightning are playing in the IIHF tournament. Isaac Howard for Team USA, Emil Lilleberg for Team Norway, and JJ Moser for Team Switzerland. We are going to talk about why that is a very good thing for these young Lightning stars and a potential future Lightning star. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's very easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more, and I also cook a lot more too. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year with Monarch Money. The IIHF tournament, a long-standing tourney where youngsters, and in the case of this year, some of the elder statesmen of the NHL and other elite hockey leagues around the world come together and battle for country supremacy. The United States, Canada, Sweden, so many great hockey nations going toe-to-toe. And the Lightning have three players where there is plenty of interest, and I think that is absolutely great for the Tampa Bay Lightning. For JJ Moser, first off, I mean, I think with Isaac Howard, a big part of it is just the fact that he's getting to play with so many elite players in the modern NHL. You've got Jeremy Swayman in goal, Jackson Lacombe, who has been one of the top young stars in the NHL this season. Michael Kessering's been around for a good bit. Mikey Eyssimont can tell Isaac Howard why he should just, really try to get his way to the Tampa Bay Lightning. Joey DeCord's been around for a while. I mean, there's so many. You can just go down the list of really solid NHL players that Isaac Howard is playing with and could be learning from. And I think he's going to go back to the NCAA with a bit of a chip on his shoulder. I know he wanted to get out and get to, at very least, the AHL with a Syracuse Crunch to start the season. That didn't happen. And as we've talked about a little bit already in this offseason, his future with the Lightning might even be in jeopardy. And it's part of the reason that when the Lightning did their congratulatory social media post, it did not include Isaac Howard. Yes, Howard isn't technically under contract with the Tampa Bay Lightning, but he's still a Lightning draftee and still a player that I was a bit shocked about when I learned was playing on the USA roster for the IIHF after I saw that post congratulating and wishing best of luck to JJ Moser and Emil Lilleberg. So I think Isaac Howard's got a really great learning experience on his hands. For JJ Moser, he's one of the more experienced players in terms of NHL hockey on the Swiss team. You've got Timo Meier and Nico Heischer, apologies if I butchered that pronunciation, as well as Kevin Fiala. And, those are all three really solid players in the NHL. The only defender that is currently on an NHL roster is J.J. Moser, but he's playing with a lot of guys in some elite leagues in Europe that I think can really help give him some pointers. And maybe he could even see, oh, this is why I'm in the NHL. And these guys who are, 5, 10 plus years older than me are still playing in different lesser leagues over in Europe. So it's an opportunity for J.J. Moser to really kind of feel like he's made it. He was a key piece in a trade for a really solid defenseman in Mikhail Sergachev in last offseason. And I think that it is also important because he gets extra playing time. You could tell that Moser was still kind of getting his sea legs under him for the better part of his return to the ice after injury. He just didn't seem like the same player, but then he was at the start of the season, because he really had a spectacular start to his first year in Tampa. He was adjusting to the right defense position well, learning a lot from Victor Hedman, and now he gets the chance to get some more ice time and really just kind of establish himself as a guy who's been around and just is doing his thing in the NHL right now. And I think it's going to give him a lot more confidence coming into next season, because something I'm going to be talking about JJ, I think, a good bit over the course of the offseason, because he, I think, is one of the players for the Tampa Bay Lightning that really needs to take his game a notch up a level for the Lightning to have some more success, especially because he's going to be on the most played defensive line alongside the captain, Victor Hedman. And the same can be said of Emil Lilleberg, less so on the line that Victor Hedman is on, but Lilleberg is one of the very few players in the NHL on Team Norway. 2, to be exact, Emil Lilleberg and Stian Solberg, who is under contract with the Anaheim Ducks, but is not a guy who gets a whole bunch of playing time at the NHL level. So in terms of NHL experience, Emil Lilleberg might be the most experienced player on this Team Norway roster. So not only, we can talk about him needing to step up as a Lightning player next season. I've already mentioned with Nick Perbix's expiring contract, we don't know who's going to be next to him on that line, on that third defensive line in the 25-26 NHL season. We don't even know if Lilleberg is going to be back, and that's something that we're going to talk about in the next segment as well. But, Lilleberg has to be one of the most respected players on that Team Norway IIHF roster, even if he is one of the younger players on that roster. Not the youngest, but definitely on the younger half, I'd say, for Team Norway. I imagine he's going to get a whole lot of playing time. He's already picked up a couple of penalty minutes, so the physicality of his play is already really starting to show out as he demonstrates that for Team Norway. He did that all season with the Tampa Bay Lightning, really was able to mix it up whenever it was needed. Whenever the Lightning needed a boost, he was usually the guy who provided a big hit, maybe got into a fight, whatever it was. He was one of the guys who started that, and that's great. But there is, I think, a lot that he can improve in terms of his defense on the ice and helping transition it to offense as well, though Lilleberg did end up with 19 points on the season, got a goal and 18 assists. The offensive side of his game could be a little bit more polished. He's just a younger guy who can use a bit more polishing in his game, but that was his first full NHL season. There are bound to be some bumps in the road there, but he's another guy who I think is going to need to take a big leap, and this is his chance to start that, his big chance to show the Lightning brass that, okay, I belong here. I am not just a guy who is on a two-way contract and could just be a flash in a pan. He played most every game in the season this year for the Tampa Bay Lightning. He was a factor in a good bit of the games, whether it was for the positive or the negative reasons. And I think that Lilleberg is someone else that might need a fight for a roster spot this season on Tampa Bay, plain and simple. His job is not secure. I think that past the second line of defense, and maybe including Darren Radish in this, no one is really safe except for Hedman, maybe J.J. Moser, McDonough, and Chernak. And yeah, that I understand that takes up most of the Lightning defense, but the Bolts do have some solid defenders, both experienced and inexperienced, in the pipeline in Syracuse, in Orlando, that could replace Lilleberg. And he needs to show that he is an elite player for his country if he's going to keep climbing up the rungs of the Lightning's defensive ladder as he earns more and more playing time over the beginnings of his NHL career. And I did tease that we'll be talking about some potential rookies, some guys who might be out to steal some jobs coming from the AHL. There are two specific players that I have in mind, but we're going to do a little breakdown of some of the guys who played on the Syracuse Crunch and Orlando Solar Bears in our final segment of the day. The Syracuse Crunch were once again a playoff team like the Tampa Bay Lightning. They have maintained a consistent presence in the Calder Cup playoffs, and a lot of that was due to players that are on the Tampa Bay Lightning roster. The top two scorers for Syracuse, Connor Sheary and Derek Pulio, might be past the point where they're going to play major minutes in the NHL again in their NHL careers. It's still good, I think, for the Lightning to have those guys as options in a pinch if they are in a big game and can't trust a rookie. Need guys like Connor Sheary and Derek Pulio, who have had some pretty significant NHL playing time, to come in and eat some minutes for Tampa Bay. But when you're looking at minor league talent, it is difficult for players over the age of 30 to get those minutes and take spots away from younger players that are also up in the pipeline. And it might be a slight differing in positions, especially on the offensive side, with these next two I'm about to mention that I think have the inside track in terms of players that can make the jump from Syracuse to Tampa Bay at maybe even opening day, but at any point in the early stages of that 25 to 2026 season. And I think Dylan Duke is the first player that comes to mind for me offensively, partly because he played 2 games in the NHL this season with the Tampa Bay Lightning and scored in his first one, and was it some miraculous, like, spinorama, crazy, deking, dangling sort of goal? No, it was pretty simple. It was Duke coming in off a rebound, just being in the right place at the right time, but especially in a surface as difficult to stay still on, really to move on at all, as NHL ice is, being in the right position is part of the challenge, is part of the skill that differentiates the men from the boys, that shows who's going to have staying power in that NHL with something as basic as being in the right spot. And for Dylan Duke, it paid off. He got himself a goal that in the game that he played kind of put the icing on the cake and helped the Lightning towards a divisional victory. And I'm not saying he's going to instantly start the season with the Tampa Bay Lightning, but comparing Duke to a guy like Gage Gonzalez, who started the season in Syracuse, certainly had a chance to make the regular season roster on opening day, did Gonzalez, and he turned into one of the Lightning's breakout players over the course of this NHL season. Gonzalez's first stint with the Tampa Bay Lightning didn't begin in October. It began early in November, and he didn't get his first point until late that month in November. He was kind of up and down, mainly up with the Tampa Bay Lightning since then, but Gonzalez played his way towards staying power on the Tampa Bay Lightning roster. He got sent down when the Lightning were doing some shuffling, getting Yanni Gourde, getting Oliver Bjorkstrand in that trade with the Kraken. And he got sent down so the Lightning could make some room to get those guys. As soon as they could, they called him back up. And they can't send him down to Syracuse right now. They can't. Gage Gonzalez is an NHL player. He is a member of the Tampa Bay Lightning, and he is too talented for that to change. That has become very clear over the course of especially the second half of that Tampa Bay Lightning season. And if there is anybody on the Syracuse Crunch, Orlando Solar Bears, any other minor league Lightning roster, whatever, Dylan Duke, I think, is the next player that could be scheduled to gradually work his way up towards the Tampa Bay Lightning and work himself into the Lightning's regular lineup. Because as a rookie, this was Duke's first season in the NHL. He played 62 games, tied Connor Sheary, a longtime NHL veteran and former Stanley Cup champ, for the team lead in goals with 20. And he also finished third behind two NHL veterans in Connor Sheary and Derek Pouliot in both assists in points, and fourth in assists with Max Crozier, who I'm also going to get to mention, in assists for the teams in those 62 games of his season. So I think that right now the Lightning's forwards are mostly set. You do have the question of will they or will they not bring back the expiring contracts of Luke Glendening or Cam Atkinson. Given their age, might be a little bit less likely. And I mean, Duke won't be able to replace especially Luke Glendening when it comes to taking faceoffs. And, he might not be the same kind of locker room presence that Cam Atkinson was for the Tampa Bay Lightning, but he's someone that I think can have an impact ASAP on the NHL roster. And, we'll start talking a lot more about these Lightning rookies, aside from Dylan Duke and Max Crozier, as players that I think could have an immediate impact on the NHL roster. But Dylan Duke, I think, certainly could be kind of the Gage Gonzalez of this next season, as a guy who gets slowly brought up from Syracuse and brought into the fold of Tampa Bay Lightning hockey. And Max Crozier is another guy that I think has maybe the best shot of any player on the Syracuse Crunch to make the Lightning roster on opening day. Again, I've said it before, I think just because of the financial restrictions that the Lightning are under, not that it really hurt them in terms of giving Jonas Johansson a raise in his 2-year deal, but the Lightning might not bring back Nicholas Perbix. To me, he certainly didn't show anything that made him stand out in a way that was bigger than the Lightning rolling the dice on a rookie. And, because the Lightning are not going to be in a rebuilding kind of mode, that is not what this Tampa Bay Lightning team does. This is a squad with a championship pedigree, with a solid but nearing 30-plus core, with their captain probably on his last NHL contract. Victor Hedman might retire at the end of his deal, and at his age, that's something that the Lightning are going to have to be think about. Cooch is over 30. Point is pushing 30. And Hagel and Cirelli are just kind of starting their prime. So the Lightning aren't in a rebuilding mode yet, and that alone, I think, could hold Max Crozier back from making the Tampa Bay Lightning opening day roster right out of training camp when it comes up in September. But he played 5 games in the Tampa Bay Lightning. He played more than any other defensive player from the AHL Syracuse Crunch with the Tampa Bay Lightning over the course of this season. And he was the guy, not Steven Santini, who's had a cup of coffee in the NHL, not Derek Pouliot, who has spent parts of multiple seasons in the NHL, and both of whom have a lot more pro experience than Max Crozier. It was Crozier that was called up to the Lightning roster for what turned out to be the final game of their Stanley Cup playoff run. It was Crozier that was called up, possibly just, to have that young guy get some playoff experience, but also just because he was probably the best defender in Syracuse over the course of the season. And offensively, he wasn't too shabby either. 4th on the team in points, 3rd on the team in assists, behind only Derek Pouliot and Connor Sheary. So I think his offensive game is just where you want it to be for a defenseman. And defensively, he's probably the most polished player in the Lightning system. So it would not be a surprise to me at all if either Max Crozier or Dylan Duke, especially Crozier, made the Lightning roster at a training camp. So as the offseason rumors start to swirl, as things start to heat up, those are 2 good names that I would keep my eye on if you are a Tampa Bay Lightning fan, as some of the younger players who could make their full-fledged rookie debut in 2025-2026. And that will do it for today's show. I'm Josh Sperber, thanking all of you for making Locked On Lightning your first listen every day. And now for your second listen, make sure to check out the all-new Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night, until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale and find NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And wherever you found this podcast, thank you for tuning in once again. Please give us a like, a follow, a subscribe. Share your thoughts in the comments. We love to hear from our fans, and we love your support because we do the show for you, the fans. So thank you again for tuning in, and please enjoy the start to your week.